welcome back to The Lover's Hole. You're with Ian.
And with Mike.
We are partway through our reading of Mauritius Command as our journey goes on through our favourite series of novels, the Aubrey Maturin books of Patrick O'Brian. We are taking a break from the Mauritius Command, and we are talking this week to a very special guest, Antonia Senior. Antonia is a book critic at The Times, as well as a writer, podcaster, and journalist, has written 3 novels set in the English Civil War and in medieval Scotland. Antonia, you've twice been the chair of judges for the Historical Writers Association's Gold Crown Awards. You're the co-host of the History Book Buffs podcast, which sounds like it's right in everybody's wheelhouse here, not to mention the author of a brand new book on the Cambridge spy ring. But Antonia, before you were any of those things, you were a Patrick O'Brian fan, so welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely to be here with you guys.
Great. It's funny, we'd had a kind of couple of conversations on social media going, hello, you were saying you'd enjoyed the show, and I was appreciating some of the stuff that you posted. And we've learned along the way that you've made this journey from business journalism to historical fiction. You've read, I don't know how many it must be, hundreds, maybe thousands of novels in the genre. Tell us a bit about your journey into historical fiction and how you got started.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I loved historical fiction from an incredibly young age. It was my thing. So all the books that mattered to me most when I was 15, and you read those books that stay with you for life, they were all historical fiction. C.S. Forrester, Mary Renault, who I'm sure we'll talk about, authors like that just absolutely were my absolute passion. I did history at university, and then I ended up bizarrely as a business journalist via a magazine called Pensions World, where I wrote, where I wrote exciting articles about pension funds and how to manage them. I was like 22, and obviously had absolutely.
For some reason, the phrase "well thumbed" is going through my brain right now, and of course, they all must have been.
Absolutely. And then from there, that was a step into business journalism, and I worked as a business journalist for a long time, up until by the time of the credit crunch. You remember when Northern Rock, the bank, nearly fell, and all of that stuff. So I was acting business editor when all of that happened. So that was pretty intense. And then I had a couple of children, and just the sort of pace of a daily newspaper is quite excruciating. I mean, it's amazing and wonderful, and I adored it, but it was a bit much. So I thought, I'll go and write brilliantly successful historical fiction instead. So I left. I became a freelance journalist a long time ago now, about 14 years ago. And I wrote moderately successful historical fiction. And I was, I think about 14 years ago, asked to be the historical fiction reviewer for The Times, which I've done ever since, which has meant reading 5 historical fiction books a month for the last 14 years on top of all the ones I'd already read. And then, I've been chair of the judging panel for the Historical Writers Association Gold Crown Award for Historical Fiction a couple of times. I think I was a judge for it once as well. And so that also involved reading about 100 extra historical fiction books on top of my existing diet. Sometimes, guys, I do long for like a robot or something in my reading, but no, mostly
working on that right now, as you probably know.
But no, mostly. But I still absolutely love it. It's still my passion. It's still my favorite genre of fiction. And yeah, as you guys say, I've also written a non-fiction account. It's my first non-fiction book. It's proper history with footnotes and everything about the Cambridge 5 spy ring. It's coming out. It's called Stalin's Apostles. It's coming out April in the UK and May in the US. So yeah, look out for that. Not enough sales in that one, but maybe one day I'll be writing some non-fiction that's a bit more sale heavy, because I do love that stuff.
Oh, sales as in SAILS. I'm getting
yes,
it.
Yes.
I'm thinking surely not. Surely it's going to be a barn burner. Come on.
No. Hopefully there's lots of actual sales. Yeah, billions of those. Fill your boots, people. But
okay, not many backstays is what you're saying. Yeah.
Not many backstays.
Yeah. Well, Tony, this has got to have given you an unparalleled view of the historical fiction market. From reviewer, from judge, from your personal involvement in it. How would you diagnose the genre right now? What state is it in? What might be thriving that people are missing?
So I've been doing this for a long time. And one thing that I have noticed quite clearly is what I kind of would call the feminization of the genre.
No.
So when I first started doing it, one of the reasons I was asked was because there was quite a lot around at that time that was kind of quite male focused with lots of swords and backstays.
Yeah.
And the literary editor at the Times knew that I loved that stuff. Like, this is my jam. I love a battle. So that was one of the reasons I started doing it. But slowly, a load of those books have begun to sort of leak out of the market. I'm just not getting sent very many of them anymore. There's barely any really coming through.
Wow.
So, you'll still see the big guys bringing out books that do quite well, like, your Bernard Cornwalls and your Harry Sidebottoms and people like that. But there's no real kind of depth in that area. And I find that very sad. The thriving subgenre the last couple of years has been feminist retellings of Greek myths. Which have, there's some great books. It's just, please, no more. I've read them all. I've read feminist retellings of every Greek heroine you can possibly imagine, and I'm just pretty done. And then there was a kind of, obviously, post Hilary Mantel, there was a time where it was a genre that had huge sort of literary chops. Like, there was a lot of kind of heavyweights kind of coming in, and in a quite an annoying way, often in a kind of way like, historical fiction people, you'll be glad to know that the real big guns have arrived. We're here to, you're like, wow, God, there's been some really good stuff going on when you weren't here. But that's sort of died a death now. So I don't think personally that historical fiction is in a golden age actually at all. I think it's slightly moribund. It's maybe looking for the next big thing. But yeah, I mean, there's still gems all the time. Wonderful, wonderful books. But it's not as exciting as I think it was a few years ago, certainly.
So, I mean, that's a shame. That also sounds like an opportunity. All the people listening to this are going to be dyed-in-the-wool historical fiction fans. That says that we can do our bit, right? We can pass on some of our favorites and, talk about it at parties without being boring. We can do that, and we can get people excited about the genre.
Absolutely. People should be excited about the genre. I mean, it's just the best. Where else can you just immerse yourself in the past in an incredible way? And one of the things that I found really interesting, actually, switching to nonfiction, is the fact that having written historical fiction gives me a kind of really useful tool for looking at the past, because quite often historians are kind of imposing patterns backwards. But when you're writing historical fiction, you have to be very clear that nobody knows what's going to happen in the next hour, let alone the next day. So that kind of sense of the historical presence and the immediacy of events and the chaos and the flux, I think is actually, a wonderful thing that you can get to much more easily with fiction than you can get to sometimes with non-fiction, actually.
Well, it's funny you mentioned creating worlds, because we had a lot of chat in the online O'Brien fandom and in our discourse about the books as well, about the kind of intersection between historical fiction and fantasy. We've had some questions from our Patreon supporters. Hello to all of our fabulous Patreon supporters. Gareth gets question number 1 here. Can you see a boundary where historical fiction ends and fantasy begins? Or to put it another way, how much deviation from, in air quotes, reality is acceptable before it stops being historical and starts being a fantasy set in a past?
That's a great question. So here's an example. I've just reviewed a book, right, which is out at the moment. And the premise is that Anne Boleyn wakes up after her execution. She reaches down. There's like a weird object by her knees. She realizes it's her own head. She picks it up. She sews it back on her body. And she sets off across London to wreak a terrible revenge on Henry VIII. So, is it historical fiction? Is it fantasy? So the fascinating thing about it is that as this sort of zombie Anne Boleyn is going through London, she reflects on her marriage with Henry VIII, and actually that is all very faithful to the history, and it's a very interesting reading, and that she gives a sense of place that's absolutely wonderful, and you get more of a sense of Tudor London than in much more straight books I've ever read. So I think there is an artificial distinction put in place by, publishers that like siloing people into genres,
Yeah.
but I think there's plenty of room to blur the lines. And I like fantasy, and I don't mind the lines being blurred. I actually prefer to have zombie Anne Boleyn than a sort of terrible reading where you pretend it's authentic history, but you play with it.
Right.
And you play with it, and you kind of
Yeah.
distort things, and you kind of change the story to fit your own narrative purpose. And I will, books that do that, there's lots of books that aren't faithful to the history, and I don't pick them up on it because it depends on what the author's trying to do. But personally, for in terms of my passion, I don't really like that. I think if you're writing a book set in the Napoleonic age on a boat and you give it an engine, you're not really for me. Do you know what I mean? But if you put in a dragon and you do the dragon really well,
right.
then maybe. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
There's a kind of invention that takes you out of the story because it jars, and there's a kind of invention that draws you into the story because it's a new perspective.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think,
Yeah.
and also I think that if you're inventive and clever and faithful to not necessarily everything in the history, but to the spirit of the history, right?
Yeah.
So I would rather have a kind of, again, like a zombie Anne Boleyn walking through Tudor London than a kind of really proto-feminist Anne Boleyn who's thinking thoughts infused by second wave or fourth wave feminism. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I kind of feel like as long as you're faithful to the idea and the spirit of the place and the time that you're writing about, then, fill your boots, do what you want, really. That's the point. It's supposed to be an imaginative response to those places.
Fantastic. There's a quote by a guy called Gustav Mahler, one of my favorite composers. I'm a classical music nut, as you might have heard. He says something like, the purpose of paying tribute to the past is not to worship the ashes, it's to kindle the fire. And I think that's pretty good.
Oh,
that's brilliant. Yeah, that's
Nice.
brilliant. And that's exactly it. Like, we don't want to be, a book that tries too hard just to sort of be a pastiche of a kind of the past is just no good at all. That it's inevitable that the present is going to have a kind of flavor within historical fiction, and that it's going to be a kind of response to those things. So that's fine. It's just when you start kind of imposing the present in a really kind of dogmatic way, or you're trying to make points about the present and invoking the past. I don't like that either. I more than don't like that. I actually hate that. But yeah, kindling the fire, bring it on.
Good.
It's funny because as you were saying that, I wanted to make some points about O'Brien's writing, but then I thought, wait a minute, I'm going to preempt our own next question here. So before I make those points, I wanted to ask you, Tony, how do you introduce someone to the Aubrey Maturin novels? I've made it kind of a lifelong mission to be a bit of an evangelist for O'Brien, especially for people who aren't necessarily the typical O'Brien readers, if you will, the swords and sandals folks. But I like them too. I want them in. But how do you articulate what's special about these books?
So what I always say to people is, look, just read Master and Commander. It's a great book, but you might get a little bit lost in the rigging. You might just be a bit like, okay, this is fine. I don't really get what all the fuss is about. And then you'll read Post Captain and you'll think, okay, I'm getting it a bit more because this is quite a cute psychological insight into these two guys. It's a broader picture of Georgian society. This is really interesting. And then I'll say, but by the time you reach the end of HMS Surprise, you will realize you've embarked on the reading journey of your life when you are going to see unfolding the single best long form series about a historical period in the English language. And at its heart, the best, most beautiful, most rewarding portrayal of a friendship that you could possibly hope to ever read or experience. So that's what I'd say.
Amen. Amen. That's, yes.
And not a word about authenticity, really. I mean, not that that's not valuable, but like what really drives people, I think, and as you're saying, is it's a powerful story about a friendship.
It is an incredibly powerful story about a friendship. And one of the things I love about it, actually, and I mean, I've reread the series multiple times. I think 5 times I've done the complete circumnavigation.
Yeah.
And what is extraordinary and sort of almost unreplaceable as a reading experience is you are so immersed to and wedded to these characters that you that you're so fond of them, almost like they're alive. So when you're rereading it and you know that a bit is coming up where Stephen's going to fall in the water, or Jack's going to make a joke that Stephen's going to kind of indulge, and it's actually often the really small moments.
Yeah.
And when you can feel one of those coming, where there's going to be like some beautiful kind of funny moment between them, it just makes you so happy. Does that make sense? You're just so engaged, and I mean, I don't know how far you've got with the Mauritius Command, but there's a moment where Jack gets a letter from home towards the end of that, and the consequences of that letter, and the way that he reads it, and how that impacts on his relationship with Admiral Bertie. Like literally, I can spend the whole book just waiting for that moment because it's just such a wonderful payoff. So because you believe the characters are fully alive and they live rent-free in your head as fully realised characters, when the good things and bad things happen to them, you are so engaged in a way that I can think of pretty much no one who can do the same. I really, across the vast pantheon of literary fiction, historical fiction, whatever that I've read.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to ask you later on for unfamiliar or potentially new avenues that listeners might explore. Who else comes close, though?
So I would say Mary Renault, and I think it's no great coincidence. I think it's the fates sending me to do this episode when you're in the middle of talking about a book dedicated to Mary Renault, because she is my other great literary love, and she does something similar in terms of the immersion in a world. One thing they both do, they're very different writers and very different eras, but one thing they both do is there is not a simile, there is not a metaphor, there is not an image that doesn't feel authentic to the time.
Right.
You're so immersed in it that, you're inside the thought patterns of people who are removed from you by time and distance, and they're recognisably human but recognisably different. And both of them do that beautifully. Mary Renault is a goddess. You guys need to read everything she's ever written. She's amazing.
It's a deal.
So how do we start that journey, Antonia? If you're new to Mary Renault, right, what do we do?
Oh, God, what a wonderful question. Now, as your Patrick O'Brian fans, you start with Last of the Wine because it is set during the Peloponnesian Wars, and it is about the adventures of a young man called Alexias, who is a pupil of Socrates, and then he falls in love with an older man called Lysis, and the two of them fight side by side in the Peloponnesian Wars. And it's brilliantly done. And there is also a massive segment of the book where they are fighting in the Athenian navy against the Spartans. So if you want, triremes ramming each other and the kind of call of the gulls as the Athenians take on the Spartans in the Ionian Sea, that is the book for you. It's absolutely marvellous.
Wonderful. Speaking of feminist rereadings, a million miles away, and you and I've mentioned Trollope's name a couple of times, and I think probably he's quite in the demo for Patrick O'Brian readers, wouldn't you say?
Trollope, gotta love Trollope. I mean, I adore Trollope. Yeah, Trollope is another one of the people I evangelize for. I don't think you can find. I was a business journalist, and people used to say, as I mentioned, obviously at the beginning, and people used to say, gosh, how do we understand what's happening with the credit crunch or whatever? And I was like, well, you read Trollope, you read The Way We Live Now, and his kind of portrayal of how a speculative stock market bubble bursts in that, and the kind of loss of confidence and how that knocks on into financial markets is the best thing you will ever read on finance. And I guess what he shares with O'Brian is that sense of kind of fully realized characters. There's not much, it's not kind of, they're not romantic books. They're not, people behave in human ways. They behave badly. They behave well. There's no kind of moral judgment about the behaviors of the characters. They just, sometimes do terrible things. They sometimes do good things, but it's all very kind of grey. And that's one of the reasons I love Trollope. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, this also begs the question, and we're getting to another question posed by a Patreon supporter here. Our supporters, Anthony and Heather, both more or less asked the same question, which is, from the point of view of a reviewer or a critic, how can you review the whole panoply of other historical fiction authors fairly and not hold them all to the same standard as O'Brien or even Renault or even Trollope?
It's quite difficult.
Yeah,
I mean, it's even more difficult as a writer because you write a page of sort of words and you're like, oh, I'll never be O'Brien. Why am I even getting up in the morning?
Yeah.
But as a reviewer, so I think the answer is, nobody, Hilary Mantel maybe, but nobody matches those guys. So you can't berate them for not being geniuses. Not everybody can. So what I tend to do actually is I approach all the books that I review with as open mind as I can about what the writer's trying to achieve and whether people will like what they're trying to achieve, because sometimes it's just not for me. Like I don't really like romance, for example, but sometimes there will be kind of historical romance because it's that. And it's not fair on me to impose my judgment of that type of book, right? So what I have to do is say, well, is it good for what it's trying to do? Will the people who like this really love this? And sometimes the answer is yes, and therefore I will be nice about it. I mean, I'm normally quite nice anyway, because one of the nice things about my job is I do 5 books a month. I have quite a lot of leeway to choose the ones that I want to sort of give a push rather than. So I don't tend to often write bad reviews. I have written bad reviews and it's quite satisfying.
No.
But they tend to be of people who are big enough to take it on the chin, right? So I'm lucky I get to choose books I love normally. And when it's books that I don't love, but I think other people will because they're well executed for what they are, then I will give them a fair crack of the whip, as it were. But yeah, not everybody can be O'Brien, but that's okay, because then we wouldn't love him as much as we do, because it's like with classical music, it's the old Amadeus thing. Like you've got to have a lot of Salieri's before
absolutely
we can all worship at the feet of Mozart, right?
Yeah. Excellent analogy.
Nicely done. Well, we had a similar question, at least in the genre. Heather had asked, why is the Napoleonic era or later so popular as a historical setting? She suggests there are other great books in other eras, of course, but the early, at least the European ventures into long-distance sea travel look like a great possibility.
Yeah, that's a good question. So Napoleonic, why is it so popular? I think for the same reason that other wars are popular. So war is the point at which human nature is put under strain, right? And most novelists are looking at building a character, putting it under immense tension and seeing what happens. And it's obvious that that's easy enough to do in war. So that's why you get a load of World War II books, a load of World War I books, a load of Napoleonic. Funnily enough, you do not actually get many historical fiction novels set in kind of more wider 18th century, early 19th century worlds. If they are set in that time frame, they are Napoleonic. Do you know what I mean? Like we don't get much in the way of broader kind of fiction, with an honourable mention to a very good writer called Laura Shepherd Robinson, who writes brilliant fat Georgian novels. I recommend those. So I think that's why the Napoleonic ones crop up. I mean, there are also quite a lot of really good books about long-distance sea voyages that take people to distant places. The one I'm thinking of particularly is actually one of my favourite ever books. It's by, what's his name? Matthew Neal. It's called The English Passengers. It won the Whitbread Award in 2000, and it's about a kind of motley crew of Channel Island smugglers who end up taking a bunch of weird people across the ocean to Australia. And it's like, because it's on a ship, it's kind of a closed environment, and it's how they all navigate each other. And it's very O'Brien-esque actually, because it's got loads of flashes of humour with the way people deal with each other. It's like, it's kind of funny but profound and sad. I really recommend that one. English Passengers, Matthew Neal. But I mean, listen, it's a big, wide world of history out there, and I would love to see more adventurous settings. Personally, English Civil War is my jam as well. Much more English Civil War I could do with. Sometimes when I look at my bookshelves, I think it feels a little bit like Henry VIII and Hitler are the only two people that count, right, in terms of inspiring novels. So yeah.
And there are loads more potential uber villain types out there in history. I mean, just the whole history of the Holy Roman Empire and the whole history of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, there could be some really great. Let's go back to the world of O'Brien for a minute, Antonia, because we've said it on the show in the past that one of the things that happens when you read O'Brien is that you have some kind of brainwave and you go off and you either just start studying philosophy or you start reading Greek or you study a history PhD, or in some cases you go sailing on a tall ship. And that didn't escape you, did it?
No, it didn't. I was in my 20s when I discovered O'Brien, and I loved him so much that I booked to do a couple of tall ship voyages because I wanted to know what it was like to sail on a square rigger. So I did one in the Caribbean and one in the Azores.
Nice.
On a ship called Stavros Esniarchos that I'm sure some of your listeners will know of because it was the Sail Training Association, one of their 2 ships, and it was just absolutely magical. So yeah, I've sat on the kind of end of the bowsprit watching the flying fish in the Caribbean Sea as you kind of swoop over the waves. There was one moment, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's one of the best moments of my life. It's so absurd that we manned the yards as we came into harbour in Barbados. So we all stood out on the yards at various points. I think I was on the topgallants, and so the ship comes in, we're all sort of standing out along the yards, and then somebody started singing Jerusalem. So we're all singing Jerusalem as we're manning the yards coming into Barbados. And it was, I mean, I've had 3 kids and that was up there.
Wow.
So it was amazing.
Talk about the hairs standing up on the back of your neck. Fantastic.
Yeah. And the Azores was also brilliant, but the opposite, I got really seasick. I was more Horatio Hornblower in the Azores than I was Jack Aubrey. But it was still amazing. It was an incredible experience.
Wow. It's funny, we've spoken to a few people who've given themselves that experience, and nobody has said, oh, it was terrible and I felt more remote from the books than ever. Everybody has said this was a really magical thing and I felt close to a little bit more of the world that the books are set in. So I'm super jealous.
Oh, absolutely closer. And also, listen, we're all a bit Aubrey and we're all a bit Maturin, right? And the first time
Speak for yourself.
But the first time I climbed up the rigging, I was like, okay, I'm definitely Maturin. It's so terrifying. And of course, the higher you go, the more you move, even on a calm day, like you're gyrating wildly through the air. And then for me, like the sense of being on the ship enhanced by reading the books, but also vice versa, I think, because I would be up there and I would be thinking of, midshipman Jack Aubrey sitting at the mastheads because he'd done something terrible, being up on the top, up there on HMS Surprise, carving his initials into the mast. So it was both. I got so much out of the experience in both directions, if that makes sense. It was wonderful.
Cool. Did you happen to meet any other O'Brien fans or O'Brien readers?
No, I evangelized at them, obviously, but yeah, I met wonderful people who, because, it's a kind of a self-selecting kind of group of people that want to sail a tall ship. And it was the grown-up voyages, because they did voyages for young people. This was the grown-up voyages, because I was like 25, 26. So it was like people of all ages. And like there was one guy who was like a really senior executive at Google. And we had to do all the jobs on the boat, like cleaning the toilets. Right. He gamely threw himself into that, but you could see he was thinking, I'm not sure this was quite what I was expecting. This was not a man, I suspect, who'd cleaned many toilets in his life. But yeah, incredible. I don't think those ships are commissioned anymore, which is a great tragedy because I think they were a wonderful thing. Yeah.
Yeah, not those particular ones. There are a couple still going, I believe, but exactly as you say, it's hard.
Well, there's plenty of time then, Ian. On you go. Get on it.
It's on my list. It's on my list.
It's funny. I just made a bunch of mental connections here. I mean, when I think about women reading O'Brien, jumping on tall ships, I always think of Petra Karbach, who is a great friend of the podcast and
Hello, Petra.
who is now a moderator on the Patrick O'Brien Appreciation Society. So we get there, but she actually went to work on these things. But I'm thinking about her now in moderating that, probably one of the topic that comes up as often as Sloss and Can It Be At is this whole idea of adapting O'Brien for the screen, big screen, little screen. What's your take on sort of the likelihood or the appeal of a future adaptation?
Well, I mean, I was so terrified about the first one because I thought they'd mess it up. And I think my husband refused to come to the cinema with me, and I had to go on my own in case I had to sort of harumph loudly all the way through it. Yeah. And I think, like most O'Brien fans, I thought the plot was stupid, but everything else was brilliant. Like the atmosphere, the characters, it was brilliant. I loved it. So happy. I'm really nervous of them making another one. I think I don't want them to, on the basis that I would be nervous about AI and CGI or whatever. Like, I would be nervous of them having fake computer-generated ships being tossed around on fake computer-generated waves because it's cheaper to make. And one of the wonderful things about that, everything bad about the original movie was because of the kind of plot demands of a Hollywood film, right? And everything good was because they got a ship, a real ship, and put a bunch of men on it and sailed it in a proper sea, right? And so if they do that again, I'm all in. I will watch that tomorrow. But I fear that budgetary constraints and the ability of computers to do extraordinary things nowadays will mean that what we get is a terrible plot and a CGI boat. And then I'm out. Not interested.
So, Antonia, we've got to the part of the show that we've been looking ahead to a little bit here. Since you're the best read person that we've had on the show by quite a distance, help us out, because people are always asking, what's another novel or author that I could try that's adjacent to or a continuation of something that we like about O'Brien? Because everybody's read C.S. Forrester if they're ever going to. Everybody's probably read Sharp if they're going to. So our challenge to you is, can you help us out with top 5 historical fiction novels that Patrick O'Brien readers might not have read yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one I would talk about is Ian McGuire, who is a fantastic writer. He's got a new one out that's about a gold rush in Canada, and that's really great. But the one I'm thinking of specifically is his book North Water. And there was, I think, a television adaptation of it, but it's a fantastic, dark, quite bleak.
It is very dark and very bleak. Can vouch. I read the first few chapters.
Yeah, it's pretty dark, but it is really good. And it gives the sense of it, because it's all very well serving on Jack Aubrey's ship, but like if you're a kind of whaler in the 19th century, whatever, this is not a pleasant environment, and you get a real sense of that. So that, I think, Ian McGuire, brilliant.
Cool.
I was thinking about slightly under the radar naval fiction series, and I would recommend, I read Shoal Stiles, who was a kind of very prolific naval author in the 1970s. And I've had a very happy summer a few years ago when I discovered his Lieutenant Michael Fitton series. And Fitton is, it fights in the Napoleonic War. He has no patronage and no connections, so he just doesn't really ever get promoted, and he just keeps trying to do his best while getting sort of slowly a little bit more bitter.
Oh gosh.
He is, I loved him. The other one I would point out for naval fiction, there's a few of them. There's a wonderful naval historian called J.D. Davies, who wrote a series of novels set in the Restoration Navy, and it's a slightly different navy because this is an era where there's the gentleman who captains the ship and the kind of sailor who actually sails the ship, and there's a kind of division of labor between the two. So it's a sort of interesting world that's a bit different, but J.D. Davis, he knows his stuff, right?
Nice.
He's an academic historian of this stuff who's also written some novels, which I would really, really recommend. Left field here. This is not naval. This is airborne. Derek Robinson. Derek Robinson is another author who I proselytize for relentlessly. So he writes books set in the RFC and the RAF. And his most famous book is actually his debut book, and it's called Goshawk Squadron, and it's set in the Royal Flying Corps in World War One, and it is like the anti-Biggles. It is
fantastic.
very cynical, screwed up young boys being thrown into the air and then thrown at the Germans.
Wow.
And what he shares with O'Brien. So O'Brien is a lot less cynical. Okay, so Derek Robertson is a bit like, if you imagine sort of a darker Catch-22, and it is sometimes funny, but it's always it's sort of quite bleak. But what he shares with O'Brien is that kind of immersion in a world that is alien and exhilarating and terrifying and, you know, violent.
Yeah.
Okay. So Derek Robinson, there are loads of those. His Piece of Cake series set during World War II, absolutely superlative. How many am I on? I've
lost track. It's either 3 or 4. And do you want to already include a Mary Renault in here? Do you want to give us a bonus Mary Renault, perhaps?
Yeah, I'll give you a bonus Mary Renault. I will give you I'm going to give you, it's a cheat. I'm going to give you 3. Her Alexander trilogy.
Oh, good.
Okay.
So she wrote an amazing trilogy about Alexander the Great. I've read the first 2 books about 20 times. I actually can't finish the 3rd book because it opens after he's dead, and I can't cope because I've fallen so madly in love with her vision of Alexander. So yeah, definitely read those. They're magical. I mean, you know, potentially we have a slightly different maybe vision of Alexander the Great now. You know, he was quite, some people accuse him of being a little on the genocidal wing of classical heroes. Mary Renault does not view him like that. You know, for her, he is a hero. So those are really good. Anything Mary Renault touched, honestly, you can't go wrong. Her books about Theseus. You know, I spoke earlier about the reimagining of Greek myths. Mary Renault did it first and best. The King Must Die and The Wolf from the Sea are reimagining of Theseus. Absolutely superb. Both of them brilliant. And archaeologically quite sound, because, you know, this is another thing she shared with Patrick O'Brien, the deep research. So she does this vision of the bull leaping in Crete, which is actually borne out by not only the archaeology that was around at the time of writing it, but any archaeology and any sort of reassessment of that Minoan civilization subsequent to when she wrote it is sort of being borne out retrospectively. Like, her imagination is so good that she kind of took what was there and created a world that's still, as far as I've read, still borne out by what we know about that civilization. And it's that deep research which I think marks both of those 2 writers, Mary Renault and Patrick O'Brien, out particularly as masters of the craft. Because you can be a great writer, but to be a great writer who is also a great historian, who can bring the wealth of political, social, and cultural knowledge that you've acquired about this era, and wear it lightly, right? You're not ramming it down people's throat. You wear it lightly, and lightly, and everything the characters say and do, it is just remarkable. And they are the 2 masters, I would say. Them and Hilary Mantel. I should mention Hilary Mantel. Bring Up the Bodies.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Excellent, thank you. So I never imagined Patrick O'Brien readers having a small to read shelf. Pile by the bed. It's always at least 12 books tottering on the bedside table, but you're going to be helpfully adding to a few more piles there, Antonia.
I hope so. And lucky you if you haven't read these books. I mean, my gosh, I hate you.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Antonia, we've talked prior to talking today, and we always finish up with, you know, what are you working on at the moment? But you know, you told us some great stories too about some things that have happened perhaps recently or a little bit further back. So I'd like to ask an all-encompassing thing. What have you been up to, and where do you go from here?
What I've been up to is trying to publicize this new book about the Cambridge Five, Stalin's Possibles, available in all good bookshops. But, you know, as part of that, I've been doing the History Book Buffs, which is the podcast. And then I was sort of trying to grow my social media presence. And I made I was doing another podcast actually about Master and Commander with a film club, and I was being brought in as somebody who'd read the books. And I made my children watch the film of Master and Commander, and luckily for them and our relationship, they seemed to quite like it. Otherwise, we would have had problems. But in the aftermath of that, like over dinner, I came up with this sort of wheeze to annoy them as well, that if I could get to 10,000 Twitter followers or X followers, I guess we call it now, I would have a tattoo which was a visual representation of the joke about the lesser of two weevils. So if I get enough, and it will break they will die of embarrassment.
Oh, that's worth it for anybody.
I know, exactly. So that's the absolute bonus. So then I said what I would do is I would have two weevils tattooed upon my body somewhere. I haven't quite worked out where. One big and one small. And then anybody who knows the joke will know that that's the lesser of two weevils. I made this pledge not having actually looked at what a weevil looks like.
Right.
I'd imagined something a bit worm-like, but actually it's a bit more kind of
like a louse sort of thing.
Yeah, it looks like a
right.
So what I've actually pledged to is if I get to 10,000, my ex handle for anybody who wants to help propel me there is @Antonia Senior. But if I get enough, then I will look basically to the uninitiated like I have two misshapen lice tattooed upon my wrist.
Right.
So...
Well, there's at least 17 or 18 people in the world who will be getting the joke, and that'll make you happy, right?
I know. I very nearly did a different joke from the canon, which was I was going to try and do a play on the word curtailed.
Right, of course.
But I thought that was probably too niche, even for a lot of O'Brien fans. Like, had a dog with a short tail, and anyway, whatever. So yeah, no, it's the weevils. So we'll see.
Well, let's see. How many more followers do you need to get to your target?
I think it's quite a lot, actually.
Okay.
I thought I was surprised by how few people seem to be interested in pushing me towards getting two lice tattooed on my wrist. But if any of your readers want to, that would be great.
Well,
readers, listeners,
maybe the vast social media outreach of the Lovers' Hole can help here. We don't know. We'll give it a try.
Well, and I remember, we were sort of, as we were, if you will, checking you out, prior to the invite, you were making a journey through the Alps.
Oh, yeah, that was amazing. So for the History Book Buffs, which is the YouTube channel and podcast, I spent a week walking over the Alps in the footsteps of Napoleon in his famous crossing. And I had a diary written by one of his foot soldiers. And I was kind of following the diary and then reading bits of it out. And I was staying where they stayed. And I stayed overnight in a monastery on the pass at the top, which was just amazing.
Wow.
Where Napoleon had dinner. And most of the men had stayed there that night before coming down the other side. And so you walk from Switzerland into Italy.
Wow.
And it was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, you can check that out on the YouTube channel if anybody's interested. But it was amazing. I would love to do more. Well, one day I'm going to say this live, so that it's nearly live, so that I have to be held to it. I'm going to do, because it's part of the Via Francigena, which is the walk to Rome. Yeah. So one day I'm going to walk from London to Rome in the footsteps of nobody. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Except to prove the aphorism that all roads lead there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very good.
I'm sure Stephen would walk to Rome if he thought of it. So
yeah, I think Jack Aubrey might get distracted along the way.
Yeah. Or end up in a bear costume wandering the foothills.
And tell us one more time about the Cambridge 5 book. Where can we find that? What should we be looking out for?
Yeah, so it's called Stalin's Apostles, the Cambridge 5 and the Making of the Soviet Empire.
Okay.
Antonia, for the folks on this side of the Atlantic who may not be as familiar with the Cambridge 5, can you give us just a little bit of background? Because I think this is a really incredible story, and I'd love to have some people pique their interest here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, I'm so immersed in these guys. I forget that you're not all dreaming about them, right? But so they were 5 young men in 1930s Britain who were recruited by Soviet intelligence in the hope and expectation that they would rise in the service of the British establishment and then still be supplying secrets to Russian. And their names are Kim Philby, Donald MacLean, Anthony Blunt, Guy Burgess, and John Cairncross. And because World War II breaks out, they are catapulted into positions of access, which their Soviet recruiters could only have dreamt of. So just as a very brief favour, for example, at the end of World War II, just when the alliance between Stalin, Churchill and Roosevelt is breaking down,
Right.
Donald MacLean is the second in command effectively at the embassy in Washington, and he is passing the personal correspondence between Roosevelt and Churchill straight to his Russian handlers, and it's being telegrammed to Moscow.
Incredible.
And
Wow.
at the same time, they decide, okay, we're a bit worried about the Soviets. Maybe we should have more eyes on them. So they set up a kind of Soviet counterintelligence arm. And the person put in charge of that, of catching Soviet spies, is the Soviet spy, Kim Philby. So
Gee.
the access these guys had is unbelievable. So it's an incredible story. It's one of the reasons why it's like lots of people write about it, but it's kind of accrued quite a lot of myths. And actually, there's been loads of recent releases of documents, and I've used all of those. Anyway, fascinating story. Fascinating story. Stalin's Apostles seeks to kind of get beneath all the layers of myth and look at who the real victims of their treachery were and how they helped Stalin with his kind of fulfillment of his strategic aims. So yeah, it's got some really good early buzz. I think people like it. It's in all good bookshop. There's an audiobook. April the 9th. I'm not sure when this is going out, but it's April 9th. It's out in the UK and late May in the US. And yeah, it was amazing. Like lots and lots of archival research, which turns out I completely adored. Maybe I was channeling my
Nice.
inner O'Brien, but the memoirs and the MI5 files, and I was in the archives of the Albanian secret police, which was amazing. It was like,
oh my gosh,
so much fun. I adored it.
And wasn't there a big meeting or a big showdown in Istanbul for Kim Philby? Am I remembering that right?
So Kim Philby was kind of the Ben McIntyre book, Spy Amongst Friends, that the end of the Kim Philby story is that he's kind of confronted by his best friend. He's in Beirut. He's confronted by his best friend, Nicholas Elliott. And but all of that, again, I unpick all of that in my book because it's not quite as it seems. It's all a bit more complicated. So, I mean, it's not O'Brien, you know.
Right.
Well, it's funny. We've talked a couple of times about O'Brien's connection to the world of espionage, and O'Brien spent a little bit of time. We've talked about black propaganda and how Stephen Maturin's subverting shore-based authorities in Mauritius and La Réunion has some parallels with Patrick O'Brien writing some black propaganda. So it's not a world that he was a million miles away from.
No, absolutely not. And in fact, Patrick O'Brien, or Patrick Russ, I guess at the time, was in exactly that same camp where at the beginning of World War II, they were rushing about trying to fill all these new arms of secret bits of government. And they basically didn't vet people because they couldn't vet people. They didn't really have time. They didn't have the resources. And that's one of the reasons why people like him, other members of the political warfare executive like him were brought in, and a number of members of the Cambridge Five are sort of suddenly plucked from journalism, academia, writing, from sort of professions where you're sort of clever dabblers in things. And they're plucked from that and brought right into the secret heart of government. So yeah, absolutely. He's completely part of the same milieu, I guess, that created the Cambridge Five and all their access. Absolutely, 100%. He's right in there, and fascinating.
Well,
and I would love to find out more about his time. It's all a bit murky, though, isn't it?
It is a bit. I think people have got evidence that he was there or close to there, certainly from some of his own papers. But I don't think anybody's released very many kind of specific papers from inside the PWB. We'll have to see.
No.
Well, it's certainly. You might say it might serve as a cautionary tale, the Cambridge Five, but we can all rest assured nowadays that only the highest professionals are brought into those levels of government, or the podcasters, influencers, kind of. Never mind.
Never mind who gets invited into Pete Hex's WhatsApp group. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Very good.
we can rest assured that, that even the leader of the free world is not touched somehow by Russian. You might have to cut this. I might stop talking in case I have to make you edit.
Well, when we broadcast it, there's a strange kind of static buzz over it. We'll know what's happening.
Right. Exactly.
Excellent. Well, before we go too much further in incriminating ourselves and kind of building stacking up our MI5 dossiers, our FBI dossiers any further, Antonia, thank you so much. It's been really, really great fun to talk about the books, to talk about the world of historical fiction, just to chat about O'Brien. We wish you lots and lots of success with your book launch and with everything else. And we hope our paths cross again.
Thank you so much, Ian and Mike. I love listening to The Lover's Hole, so it's been an absolute honour to be on. Thank you.
Our pleasure. We're so happy to have had the chance to talk to Antonia. We hope that you've enjoyed our conversation with her as well. And of course, next time we're back to the next chapter in our reading of the Mauritius Command, and who knows where that is going to take us. So please join us once again on The Lover's Hole.